recording the session. Okay. So before we move on, colleagues, please note that this workshop is recorded and all the workshop resources, which includes the workshop recording as well as the presentations of this workshop, will be shared to your respective Moodle communities, which is the supervisor community and the PDRF community. Another thing, it will be also available to the RCD-MS system, which was launched last week, Friday. So if you are unable to register or to find these resources, you are more than welcome to email us on RCT inquiries or supervision calls, and then we will attend to your email. So as I've mentioned, I am Kosietu. I'm from the Research Capacity Development Unit. It is an honor to be your moderator for today's workshop, connecting across generations, improving communication between supervisors and students. And our facilitator for today is Dr. Lorenzo David, who will be sharing his experience and his expertise regarding this. And we also request you colleagues to engage in this workshop just to share your experiences. We understand that some of us here are more experienced and some are new in the supervision journey. So we request and urge everyone to engage, to participate, to ask questions and share your journey or your experiences. So without any further waste of time, allow me to go through Dr. Lorenzo's bio. Dr. Lorenzo is the coordinator at the Research Capacity Development Unit within the postgraduate school at the University of Johannesburg. He recently completed his PhD in biochemistry at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where his research focused on targeted anti-cancer drug delivery driven by a commitment to education. Dr. Lorenzo seeks to inspire students to achieve personal and academic success. He advocates for a holistic, hands-on, and a learner-centered approach to education, emphasizing the importance of value-based learning. Colleagues, that was Dr. Lorenzo's bio, who will be facilitating this workshop. Just to remind you, colleagues, that I'll be sharing evaluation feedback on the chat. We request you to kindly fill that evaluation in. It takes about 2 minutes to fill it in. The evaluation feedback help us in organizing workshop of this kind and in finding the impact that we are making to supervisors and PDRFs, and also to ensure that if you attended this kind of workshop, you will be getting a certificate of attending for today's workshop. Also, not only that, but also to ensure or to encourage our facilitators for taking their time to give them feedback to say this is what the participants said about a workshop that you presented for us. So colleagues, without any further waste of time, I will now hand over to Dr. Lorenzo David. If you do have a question, just unmute your mic and ask a question, or just raise a hand. I will prefer you to raise a hand so that I will notify Dr. Lorenzo David if there is a hand up, and your mic will be enabled then to ask or to share your thoughts based on the workshop or presentation. Other than that, you are more than welcome to also share or ask your question under the chat. Just type in your question, and then I will notify Dr. Lorenzo David that there is a question or there is a comment comment on the chat. So thank you so much, colleagues, for attending. We really appreciate the time you have taken, and also to our facilitator for taking the time as well. Dr. David, thank you so much for presenting today and taking your time to share your experience or expertise with other colleagues as well. We do hope and believe that this workshop will be fruitful to all the colleagues that attended today. So thank you so much. Dr. Lorenzo, you can start with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nkosi, for that introduction. And I'd just like to say good morning, colleagues. I hope that you all are well. I'd like to thank you once again for making the time to attend this presentation. I'll just switch on my camera for a few seconds so you can put a face to the name. So I hope you're all well, but I'm going to be presenting now, so I actually will turn it off so that we can actually go through the presentation. So today's topic is something I feel is very important. And the reason being for that is obviously as we go on our journeys, our respective journeys, we understand that there are always newer students who are coming into academia. And what we notice is that while generally our style of teaching, it may adapt or evolve, but the students themselves and the students that we are actually dealing with, their expectations of what they require from us, as well as what they consider to be the norm, actually shifts between generations. And I think us being able to improve communication between ourselves, as and those of us who are supervisors, to students is actually very important because if we are able to build that connection, we're able to have a positive effect on things like efficiency, output, as well as allowing our students to grow within the role that they are or the degree that they are in. So the primary purpose of this presentation today is to help supervisors as well as their students improve communication. And I think this is obviously the key point of the presentation. This will ultimately improve the working relationship, increase productivity, and foster a better academic environment. I think each of us can think back to a time, be it either at university or maybe if you're working before university, in that if you do not have a good relationship with your well, just for the sake of it, say a line manager or your supervisor, it makes life very difficult. Even the simplest of tasks or the simplest of assignments become something that you dread doing. So we understand that being in academia itself is not an easy task, and the pressure that is on students as well as supervisors and staff is immense. So we want to try and limit these unnecessary pressure as much as possible. And one of the ways we can do this is to improve communication. Because if we can look at an issue or a problem from the other person's perspective, and communicate our feelings and our thoughts clearly, this aids in a better working environment, which obviously the end result of that will be higher productivity and higher efficiency. So effective communication between these two groups is crucial for any successful research outcome in terms of academic growth, because that's one of the things that we also look at. We don't just want the students to get that piece of paper and publish that thesis at the end of it. We want to see growth within them. We want to see them develop from someone who obviously needs maybe a bit more guidance to someone who is more independent, as well as effective communication will allow for career advancement. I think it's important at this point to actually point out that every student that we come into contact with sees us as a role model. And I just use the term us. I understand that there's some very experienced members of the audience today, so forgive me, but what we notice is that they look at us as role models. So if we can model good behavior, if we can model good methods and techniques of communication, then obviously this will translate into them, into their academic journey and become the norm. And slowly we see that there's going to be a shift in terms of culture between how we communicate between supervisors and students. So quickly, if I would just like to go through why exactly is communication crucial? Now, many of us would obviously have this answer in our head, but what I would like us to, how I'd like to break it down is that communication lays the foundation for any successful research collaboration. So communication generally, it needs to be clear, respectful, and open. And in doing so, it ensures that both supervisors and students feel understood, valued, and able to collaborate effectively. Now, often when we think of the term collaboration, we obviously thinking between collaboration between our peers, but the relationship that we have with our student is also, it also has an aspect of collaboration happening there, because we offer the guidance and in many cases, the resources for them to continue their studies, but they also are putting in the physical work in terms of lab work, the research, as well as in terms of their mental input as well. So it is a collaboration that exists between these two parties. So without clear communication, it is very easy for misunderstanding, addressed conflicts, and productivity issues can arise. So when we have breakdown in communication, we see that it has a knock-on effect, a domino effect in terms of creating issues that generally should not be there. So today, I'd like to quickly go through firstly the agenda for today's session. And I'm just going to try and unpack these quickly and we'll go into a bit more detail as we go through the presentation. So the first thing I'd like to understand before we break down how do we improve communication, we need to have a solid understanding of the generational differences that exist between many different people that will be in the university, be it from a supervisor, a student to a staff member. These are some of the techniques that can be applied to all forms of communication that we have with our peers, as well as those students who are, who we are guiding. So in terms of the overview, I'm going to speak about briefly go through from baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Z, and just provide some insights on what are some of the general stereotypes or characteristics that we associate with each of these generations. So we will also speak about some of their communication preferences, their values, and their work styles. Now, please, I just have to put a disclaimer here. These are based off, some research that we've done online, and obviously it is also it's a generalized approach what we have, and there are always exceptions to the rule. So please keep that in mind. The next point we want to talk about is what are some of the challenges in supervisor-student relationships. So here we'll speak about everything from some communication gaps to role confusion, as well as the divide in digital communication preferences. And this relates into technology and tools. The last point we'll touch on here is some of the cultural shifts. So if we look at, let's just say, baby boomers, their work-life balance ethic compared to the importance of it in today's present culture, we'll see that there's quite a difference between it. So by us understanding where each generation is coming from, it allows us to actually come to shall we say, an agreement or rather an understanding when it comes to communication. So the next point would be some tips for improving communication, and this will lead into establishing clear expectations. And I think this is very important no matter what type of interaction or relationship that we're having, in a professional environment, is that we always need to establish clear expectations. What do I expect from you and what can you expect from me? Because at the end of the day, like we said, this is a collaboration. We also would like to speak on adapting to different communication styles, as well as touch on things such as active listening, as well as encouraging open dialogue. The fourth point would be some techniques for effective communication. And we've just got a few techniques that we've actually put together here. And hopefully these will be useful and you can implement these moving forward from this presentation. The fifth point would be building a healthy supervisor-student relationship. And this is basically defining the role of mentorship versus day-to-day supervision, as well as how do we support career development and set boundaries, something which is very important in an academic environment. And we'll touch on some examples that we've come into contact with in the past. And the last point would be, we've just got a few case studies that we'd like to go through. Just to Just as a disclaimer, once again, I understand the agenda. We see 6 points and it's going to take a lot of time. I'm going to try to keep the presentation as concise as possible while still covering the important information. Please note that I do welcome any contributions from the audience, and I think it would be beneficial to many of us in the session if there could be a dialogue between us, because my experiences will be very different from many of the members sitting in the audience. And many members, we have some very distinguished members in the audience today, will have years of experience. And I think it would be lacked of me. It would not be a good thing of me if I do not try to lean on some of that experience to basically add to this presentation as well. So just as an icebreaker, generally speaking, there is not many people do not feel comfortable unmuting their mics and speaking in the session. So if that's something that you don't feel you'd like to do today, please can you post any thoughts that you have in the chat box, and Mr. Nkosi will actually alert us to that as well. So I thought just to kind of get the ball rolling, a simple question will be, and even if we think about this, what are some of the generational differences that we've observed in terms of previous supervisors, and how feedback is given and is received? So while I allow the audience to think if they want to contribute to this or not, please feel free to unmute at any point. If I think about it from my own perspective, some of the generational differences that I've observed in terms of previous supervisors, the example that I always go back to will be that of my honors supervisor, Professor Gupta. And he was, for lack of a better term, I hope I'm not offending anyone, but he was more of he had old school values in terms of he had a certain idea of what he thought supervision entailed. And obviously he was very distinguished in what he'd done. He actually had, like, I think he was a double doctorate in multiple fields. And some of the generational differences we had, so he always told us, I'm just here to guide you. And literally what he did, I remember on the first day of our honors, when we first got into the lab, he handed us a manual. He went through the different machines that we have. He says, okay, come contact me if you have any issues. And basically left us on our own. If I look at that compared to how today, how we approach students, obviously the approach is slightly different, because obviously the generation is actually different. And we need to understand that each generation is actually defined by the experiences and the environment that they're growing up in. In terms of feedback, how it's given and received, in terms of Professor Gupta, I remember my first draft of my thesis that I gave into him. I believe that there was more red writing on that thesis than there was actually my own words. And when I received that, I was heartbroken. I was like, I poured everything that I had into this thesis, and what I received is literally just someone telling me that everything that I'm doing is wrong. So I think the way in which today we need to construct our feedback and how it's given and how we receive feedback from our students obviously will be different from how it was, shall we say, 30, 40 years ago and even beyond. So if there's any members of the audience who'd like to contribute to this topic, please feel free. I'll leave it on for a few seconds before I move on to the next portion of the presentation.
Yes, Dr. David, there is a message from Musa. Generational differences, supervisors with more years of experience tend to have the habit of recurring more and more evidence, even when findings are substantiated. There is this inherited need to use every tool possible for data collection. I find that younger supervisors are more prone to using one method and mastering it. That was a message or a contribution from Musa.
Thank you, Musa. I think that's very important. And I think that leads into the point of when we look at some of our supervisors, I mean, they can be senior lecturers or professors. We need to understand that they have so much of experience and they've learned through their experiences. And it is important for us, obviously, to lean on that. Even coming in as new academics, I know that generally we have, I have this new idea or there's something new that I want to implement. But I think it's always important that when we are actually going through this and we're looking to innovate in any way, we need to also keep in mind that there is a reason why things have been done in academia for a certain way. So I agree with you that there's a lot that we can learn from experienced supervisors. And I think coming in as new academics, this is one of the reasons why we're having these sessions, is because there is no guide on how to become a good supervisor. So through accessing, different workshops, through interacting with different supervisors and looking at different styles, we can kind of pick and choose the best aspects of all of the experienced members around us, and we put that into ourselves and we accumulate that. And obviously, we put our own spin in it, and that's how we will continue to improve. So, no, thank you for that point. I think that is one of the major differences that, if we look at supervisors previously to now, and it's something that, yeah, hopefully we can implement as well in our own supervision journey, learning from these experienced members of staff. So I wanted to speak quickly about understanding some of the generational differences. And to be honest, the reason why I put this here is because when people say, oh, it's a millennial behavior, it's a baby boomer behavior, in my mind is like, oh, I'm not exactly clear what generation they're speaking of. So just to provide some clarity for us, we look here firstly in terms of baby boomers. So before I get into that, let me rather say generational differences shape the way people work, communicate, as well as manage their time. So we need to understand that the way we behave is actually governed by our experiences and how we were brought up in the environment that we were brought up, especially in terms of academia. So by understanding these differences, it actually helps us to create a more harmonious, a better working environment, which is something that obviously we all will strive for. Everyone wants to work in an environment where they feel valued, where they feel comfortable, where they're able to share their ideas, and where they feel that there's collaboration and obviously everybody is there to assist one another as well. So we look at the first generation, which is going to be baby boomers, and this generation is between 1946 and 1964. If we look at some of the generalized characteristics, they are known for their strong work ethic and their value for job security. So an example that I can give here, and I hope that my dad doesn't mind. So my dad is he's been teaching for a long time, and he forms part of the baby boomers. And the point that actually jumped up to me was actually job security. So these are something that actually they value above many other aspects. Reason being is obviously from the era that they came from. So when we actually speak about, some of our colleagues and friends who within a year or a year to 2 years are actually switching roles, for people in that generation it may be a bit difficult to understand, and it may be seen as if, there's no direction or there's a lack of interest, that people are losing interest, but it's actually two different generations and two different perspectives trying to observe the same issue. So in terms of baby boomers, they tend to prefer face-to-face communication and formal structured settings. So they may want to have, your supervisor may want to have meetings, or you as a supervisor may prefer to have these face-to-face meetings, which does have its pros because obviously over text is very difficult, and over video call it doesn't have the same effect. When you are face-to-face with someone, you don't only listen to what they're saying, but you can read their body language. And if there's any issues, you can address it in that issue as well. Um, so baby boomers believe in hierarchical organizational structures and basically expect respect for authority. And some of the challenges in terms of communication is that in the current age is that baby boomers may struggle with digital communication tools and might prefer traditional methods like phone calls or emails over instant messaging. So once again, just a disclaimer that these are just some generalized points that we've put together. So then we move on to Generation X, and they are generally between 1965 to 1980. Now we notice as this generation is moving, the Generation X has become more independent and adaptable. They having witnessed the rise of technology and globalization. So basically, based on their experience and what they grew up in, that has basically been incorporated into their characteristics and their behavior. So they appreciate direct communication as well as a work-life balance, but also value professional autonomy. So they are often caught between older generational work structures and newer, more flexible models as well. And some of the challenges in terms of communication that they have is that they might have a more straightforward communication style, which we notice sometimes might be misinterpreted as bluntness or coldness by younger generations. Now, I think this is obviously an important point because when we're dealing between communication between different generations, if I am speaking to the audience today and I make a point or I'm speaking in this tone, my my intention is literally just to generate conversation and to inform on the topic. But let's just say if there is someone else who doesn't appreciate your tone of thought, your tone of talk, or that you're being straightforward, they may misinterpret it as being offensive. And we've seen so many examples of this even in the news, and it's even sometimes led to people unfortunately losing their positions. So yeah, something just to keep in the back of our mind. The next one would be the millennials. And millennials are digital natives. They value flexibility, inclusivity, as well as social responsibility. And we'll notice obviously lots of social campaigns that have actually emerged during this period and continue to do so moving into present times. So they prefer digital communication tools, and this can be such as the email, your video calls, etc. And they are highly collaborative. They want to work with each other. And obviously, these digital communication tools actually facilitate this. So they often prefer feedback that is frequent and constructive, valuing mentoring rather than traditional supervision. So if we look at this, the difference between just being a supervisor, between being a mentor, I would say in terms of a mentor is that we're not only helping the student to achieve their goal of completing this degree, but we're also allowing them to develop more widely, to develop faster. We look for greater opportunities for their own personal development and allow them to become independent as soon as possible so that they can go into their own roles as well. So some of the challenges that millennials will face in communication is that they might expect more frequent feedback, which could be overwhelming for supervisors who prefer less frequent check-ins. So just something to consider. And the last point here would be Generation Z, which is from 1997 to present. So this generation is extremely tech savvy. They are highly connected and they prefer immediate feedback and often engage in, immediate communication. They're more focused on mental health. Work-life balance is something that is actually very important to them. And as well as diversity and inclusion initiatives. And if any of us have actually been aware of what's been happening recently, we noticed that obviously these are some of the hot topics that have actually been present around for the past couple of years and falls into this actual generation as well. So some of the challenges quickly, if we can go through in terms of Generation Z, is that they may value clear boundaries between personal and professional lives, which could clash with supervisors who work long hours or have unclear work-life balance practices. So, I've worked with certain students before, and even if there's a deadline tomorrow and they have 50% of their paper left to write, once it reaches a certain time, they're like, we're knocking off, we will tackle it in the morning or we will ask for an extension, because for them there is a clear definition between what is work and what is actually time for your family or whatever else it may be. So obviously these are generalizations that we're making, but just to provide some background for us. So a discussion once again, I'll leave it up for a few seconds. Are there any generational differences that you have observed in your work environment? And how have you navigated these differences to create a more productive relationship? So essentially, based on these characteristics that we've just discussed, if let's just say I am Generation Z and my supervisor is a baby boomer, as an example, how do we navigate these differences between our own characteristics and what we consider to be the norm? If anyone would like to jump in, please feel free. I'll leave it up for a few seconds before moving on to the next slide. So I can always come back to these discussion points later on if anyone wants to add a later stage. But in the interest of time, I'll just move on quickly to some of the challenges in supervisor-student relationships. So as we went through it in the agenda, the first one is going to be communication gaps. So supervisors and students may have different expectations for communication. This can be in terms of either your frequency or the style of communication, and students often expect more mentoring and feedback, while supervisors may see them as independent researchers as well. So as we can see, there is a gap in communication and a gap in expectations between the two groups that are present. So one example is that a student may prefer weekly meetings, and in these weekly meetings, they may require detailed feedback. Now, on the other hand, a supervisor from a different generation may be more comfortable with less frequent check-ins, and the reason being is that's how they learned. They actually learn through self-study and they learn through actually going through that process, and therefore they expect their students to go through the same as well. So this disconnect, this simple disconnect, can actually lead to frustrations on both sides, where the student may feel that the supervisor is uninterested, and the supervisor may feel that the student requires too much supervision, and the point of a higher degree will be independent learning with occasional guidance along the way. So the next example we can speak of would be role confusion. So supervisors may view their students as independent researchers already. So especially when you come up to your master's and your PhD level, you're expected to have some level of independence. Whereas students, coming in from honors straight into masters, you may still seek mentorship and clear guidance. So there can be a bit of confusion about what level of autonomy is expected. And this is especially true for, let's just say, new master's students, because they're coming straight in from honors as well. So an example here is a student, let's just say a master's student, might not know where to reach out for help and may feel isolated, you know. Whereas if you look on the opposite end of the spectrum, a supervisor may assume that the student is managing without any issues. So in this case, there is no clear communication happening between the two camps. And we notice that obviously this is leading to issues which obviously will snowball as time goes on. Some of the challenges that affect supervisor-student relationships will also be technology and tools. So supervisors, especially from previous generations, might not be so comfortable using new communication tools, and these could be everything from Zoom, Teams, etc. And this could create some frustration for younger students who prefer these tools. An example here would be a student might send a quick message over, let's just say, Teams, expecting a prompt reply because in their mind it is a form of instant communication. But the supervisor, maybe they don't check their Teams very often, or they may prefer a formal email, and therefore this can lead to misunderstandings due to miscommunication. Something which is actually very important and something I'd like to highlight would be the cultural shifts. So there are different expectations regarding work hours in terms of your office presence. So in work hours, when I need to be careful how I structure this. When I was in masters, we were expected to be in the lab for the majority. If it means you're working from 8 in the morning until 1 the next morning, that is something that is expected of you. But obviously, supervising students recently, once it hits a certain time, they've allocated a certain number of hours for the day, and obviously they have different priorities. And this is not to say that one generation is better than the other or one generation is right over the other, but it's just based off your experiences. In terms of office presence as well, due to COVID, many of us actually had to work from home, and therefore now we're coming into this hybrid environment where you work maybe 2 days in the office and 3 days at home. A more traditional supervisor or manager, shall we say, may require you to be or may expect you to be in the office every day, because if you're not in the office, in certain people's minds, you're not doing work. So there are cultural shifts for us to actually consider. And I think it's always important to consider it from the perspective of the student, because we understand our perspective, but our perspective is based on our experiences. Sometimes if we try to place ourselves in the position of the student, we can observe it from a different perspective, understand that there has been a culture shift, there has been a push towards a greater work-life balance, which, if all of us are being honest, who would not like to have a good work-life balance? Who would not like to, also spend time, have that extra couple of hours in the evening to actually spend with your family, or, or even just unwind in front of the TV? So there are pros and cons to each of these, and I think it's important for us to understand these issues in context and obviously apply what we can and to make the changes that we feel would be necessary. And the last point I'd like to speak about is cultural shifts in terms of productivity. So if we think about this, if we obviously are working longer hours, our productivity is going, well, generally speaking, our productivity is going to be higher. But obviously, with some of the tools that we have available to us today, some of the search engines, etc., that's not always the case. So I think if we look at an example here, a good one will be a student may prefer working late at night or may even prefer working remotely due to issues with transport, whereas a supervisor may view this as a lack of commitment or engagement. So, what we see is a recurring theme in this presentation so far is that it generally deals with perspectives of each of the generations. So we've gone through the generations and we understand what is important to each of the different generations. So when we come across, an issue or sort of conflict, before we try to rush in, for lack of a better word, I think it's important just to pause and to kind of try and view the situation from the student's perspective, or even if you're a student, from your supervisor's perspective, because obviously we need to have all of the information before we make any informed decision. So again, there is a discussion point here. I'll just leave it up for a few seconds. If you want to add, feel free to, but I will move on to the next slide and you can stop me and I can always come back to the slide as well.
Uh,
So the discussion
Well,
point
thank
was,
you, Dr. David. There was an answer or a message from Musa
okay,
regarding the previous discussion that you posed. Yes, Gen X colleagues tend to email at 2 a.m. And as a Gen Z, I find that urgency for communication can be counterproductive. That was a contribution from Musa regarding the previous discussion that was posed.
okay, thank you. Thank you, Musa, for that input. And thank you for contributing to the discussion as well. We really value your input. So yeah, that is important. Yeah, sometimes you receive, maybe you wake up at 2 in the morning to get a drink of water and you look at your, bad habit is many of us will look at our phones or just check our emails because it's force of habit. And you see an email that can generate some feelings of anxiety sometimes as well, especially if it's something which is pressing, shall we say. So I think it's good for us to understand, and I think a way for us to navigate or deal with such circumstances, if we are Gen X versus Gen Z, whatever it may be, is again we go back to the point is to establish clear boundaries and clear expectations. So a good tip that one of the supervisors actually gave me a long time ago, and even I've heard it from a few of the lecturers here at UJ, is that at 2 in the morning sometimes it could just be, when you could be reading something, you could be watching TV, and a thought pops into your head. So I'm just trying to explain it from the perspective of the, say, the previous generation. And you don't want to forget it. And this may be an important point. So you just put an email and you send it to the student. Now, the feedback that I've actually received from some of the supervisors was that they do that firstly because they feel that point is important, but they're not expecting the student to respond at 2 in the morning. So I think one supervisor actually made it very clear in the beginning of their meetings. And when they first meet students, they say, you will receive emails from me after hours. Please note that I don't expect you to respond until the next day, until your official day or your day starts. So by establishing these sort of boundaries, it improves communication. And the there will be a mindset shift from the student saying, oh, you know what, my supervisor is actually troubling me at 2 in the morning for this, to oh my God, my supervisor is actually thinking about my research and trying to help me at 2 in the morning. So there's a shift in our mindset between, or the pressure is being put on to me rather than it shifts to, oh, you know what, my supervisor actually is quite dedicated because they're emailing me with an idea at 2 in the morning, which means that, my research is important to them. So I think that communication helps to unpack that and allows us obviously to build better relationships as well. So we're going to go on to some tips for improving communication. The first one, and I've just touched on now, is going to be to establish clear expectations. So from the outset, both supervisors and students should openly discuss as well as agree on expectations for communication. And this can include, how frequent are you going to have your meetings? Are you going to have a bi-weekly catch-up meeting, a weekly, every 2 weeks, every month? What is your preferred communication channel? Is it going to be Zoom? Is it going to be WhatsApp, email? Do you want me to come in? What about timelines for feedback? And I think this is important because if I am up until 2, 3 in the morning and I submit my chapter to my supervisor and I don't hear anything for the whole of the next day, in my mind, like, oh, I sat up so late. But if you have clear expectations in the beginning, it can prevent any of these negative thoughts from even creeping in. And I think also something that's important, some other points would be what level of independence and guidance will this collaboration offer, as a supervisor, as well as having a clear, to mutually agree on some of the expectations, which can minimize understandings as well as improve trust. So we had a meeting, a workshop rather, a few days ago, and we do understand that when you register as a student at any university, you will obviously sign an agreement in terms of between the student and the supervisor, and there's certain roles and responsibilities which are associated to both of them. So this is an official document. Obviously, it is a administrative requirement by UJ, but nothing stops us as supervisors from drafting a quick, say, memorandum of understanding, in which we say, these are my expectations of you as a student. What are your expectations of me as a supervisor? And to have that down in writing, then if there's any issues moving forward, we can say, but hold on, we actually, we agreed on this set of principles and we are aligning and keeping to it. So by having something down in writing, because obviously word of mouth and memory is not always the best thing to be trusted and can sometimes let us down. So having this here also helps us to establish those clear expectations, to have it in writing, and to help us to move forward, obviously, with greater purpose. So another tip for improving communication is to adapt to different communication styles. Not everyone learns the same way. Not everyone communicates in the same way. So it is important for both parties to understand each other's communication preferences as well as be flexible. Because I'm coming in as a student and I tell my supervisor I only communicate via instant messaging, that does not mean my supervisor has to change the entire behavior to adapt to me. But if it is a collaboration, as it is between a supervisor and a student, there can be an agreement that is formed, a compromise that is formed between us as well. And it's good for us to basically to iron these out in the beginning. So in this same regard, supervisors may need to adapt to newer communication platforms, while students might need to adjust to a more formal communication methods. And this can be obviously when it's necessary. The next point I'd like to speak about is active listening. This is something that we
Sorry,
hear.
Doc,
Yeah,
to interrupt.
no
There was a
problem.
question regarding communication
Mhm.
from Senzo. What are the benefits of using formal versus informal communication styles in supervision?
Hmm. Okay, so let's look at a formal style of communication. So I would consider that to be, let's just look at an email. So the advantage of using a formal style of communication is obviously you have a record of all communication between yourself and your student. That would be a good thing. It also sets the boundaries in terms of your interaction between your student, because if we look at today, there's a greater number of younger academics who are joining the university. And obviously the age difference between us and our new students compared to when we joined as students and our then supervisors, the gap is much smaller. So using a formal communication style will actually allow us to establish those boundaries and make it clear to the students, even though there may only be a few years between us, our relationship remains professional. There is clear boundaries that exist between us, and obviously the relationship that we have is that of a supervisor and a student. So that are some of the advantages of formal. In terms of informal, let's just say that you are my supervisor and I am your student. And in terms of Senzo, and I have a conference that I'm going to in 2 days, but I'm really struggling to fit everything on my poster or put my presentation together. So in that case, a formal method of communication may not be the best approach. Reason being is because not everyone checks their emails multiple times an hour. So in that case, an informal as a method of communication, such as instant messaging or a video call, shall we say, that will have its advantage because obviously I need guidance right now. So if we look at it in terms of there are pros and cons to each of formal versus informal. And I think moving into, as emerging academics and even as more seasoned academics, it's good for us to always, there's no right versus wrong approach, in my personal opinion. I feel that there is benefit to both formal and informal methods of communication because it will be dependent on the specific situation and the context that we are facing ourselves. So, Senzo, I hope that answers your question. If not, please feel free to unmute and you can speak. But in the meantime, I will just go on to the next point, which will be active listening. So active listening is something that we hear about very often, but what exactly does it mean? So active listening means if I'm having a conversation with my student, very often what we notice is, especially if there's conflict, as soon as a student starts talking and brings up a topic, within the first 10 seconds, I have my response. So, which means I am not listening to their perspective. I'm not considering the evidence that they're providing. I've already come up with a conclusion on my own. So basically, active listening means when we are dealing with students, and this is a skill that we will develop over time, it's that we listen without forming any response while they are speaking. So basically, we first receive the information from the student or from the supervisor. We consider what they've said in the context of the situation, and thereafter we craft our response. And we notice when we're able to do this, more often than not, our response will actually be different to what it would have been if we just, responded immediately. So active listening is something that we can obviously we can learn and we can grow in. And yeah, it's a skill. I mean, no one can say that they're perfect at it, but just like with everything, like learning never stops, no matter if you have your PhD or even beyond, if you are whatever level within the university, learning never stops. So we can always continue to learn and improve our methods of communication and improve ourselves as well. So in terms of active listening, some of the techniques that we can employ in this regard would be firstly to maintain eye contact. Now, obviously, please, I'm not saying stare down your student, but a respectful level of eye contact, showing that I am interested in what you're saying, I'm hearing you. The next one would be to paraphrase what I'm saying. So to clarify what is being said versus what is received, you can say things as, so I hear what you're saying is, so if I can just summarize, basically what we're talking about is, and you go on to the point. And also an important point is ask clarifying questions. No matter if you're a supervisor, there are still things that you can learn from your students, and that's just my personal belief. And there's nothing wrong with asking a clarifying question, especially if the student has brought up a new area which maybe we all not have touched on before. So by making these little adjustments, we are actually able to minimize many of the issues that we face later on. Another point that we'd like to speak about, another tip would be to encourage open dialogue. And this just deals on you as a supervisor and your supervision style. So both supervisors and students should create a safe environment where open feedback is actually encouraged. We need to remind ourselves that the point of the supervision is not for us to tell the students everywhere you're doing this, this, and this wrong, but basically to help them to grow so that the next draft that they send to us is going to be of a higher quality than the previous one. And in doing so, we're helping them to grow in academia as well. So regular check-ins can actually provide an opportunity to address issues before they actually escalate. So some of the techniques that we've come across here is to use I statements to express concern. So you're not placing the blame on someone else. So as a student, instead of saying, you have not made the expectations clear for this project, you can say, I feel unsure about the expectations for this project. And obviously vice versa can be for the supervisor as well as acknowledging emotions in the discussion. So if you're having quite an intense discussion with your student, and both of you may be frustrated, you can add something like, I understand that this might be frustrating, but these are the reasons why I've made this decision. And by doing so, the student who in this current generation and even the previous generation wants to feel as if they're being heard, wants to feel as if obviously, my thoughts and my contributions are actually being well received. So I think that's something that's very important. In terms of the fifth and last point for tips for improving communication, it's going to be to foster empathy as well as mutual respect. Now, effective communication actually thrives in an environment of mutual respect. Now, we need to recognize that each person's experiences, their challenges, as well as their expectations may differ based on their generational background. And this is something that we have touched on previously. So as an example, students may or should recognize that supervisors may have years of experience in navigating academic environments. And this is something I can attest to as a student. I felt I felt that there was no need to do a second assay to confirm the results, because maybe the assay would have taken me 2 months to actually do. It was 2 months of work just for me to get the same result. But obviously, I didn't have the same oversight as my supervisor. But looking back now, I see the value and the importance of the guidance that was provided to us. So from a student, we need to acknowledge that, we have formed this collaboration, this relationship with our supervisors because of the experience that they have. And even though we have certain expectations, we also need to trust in their experience. On the opposite side, supervisors should recognize the value of fresh perspectives that students often bring. And their perspectives is obviously shaped by their experiences, and that it has a direct link to their environment that they've actually come up and grown up in as well. So we've come to some techniques for effective communication, and please forgive me for the acronyms that I use. These are, some that we found that we've researched. So hopefully they'll be of value. So the first one is going to be the acronym will be the 5W1H framework. And if we break it down, what exactly does this mean? So this framework ensures clarity as well as completeness in communication by addressing. So the 5Ws are going to be who, the first one. So who is involved when you're dealing with the communication? The second W is going to be what. What exactly needs to be done? What is the purpose of the communication? What do we hope to achieve? The third W is going to be when. So when exactly is this due? The fourth one will be where. Where will this happen? Will it happen in person? Will it happen over Teams? Will it happen, in a hybrid environment? And the last W is going to be why. So why is it important? And the H actually stands for how. How will this be accomplished? So by using this technique, we are able to answer or clearly communicate the issues surrounding who, what, when, where, and why, as well as how. And by answering this here, it actually provides a good framework in terms of effective and clear communication between the student as well as the supervisor. So the next model we can speak about, they've acronymed it to the SBI model for feedback. And essentially, this model will help us to structure feedback to be more clear as well as constructive. Remember, we know that the point of feedback is not to point out to the student that, you're doing a very bad job or you've made so many mistakes. It's like, you can improve in these areas. I believe that you can improve in these particular areas. So the SBI basically stands for situation, behavior, and impact. In terms of situation, you need to describe the context. So when you're communicating, you can say, in yesterday's meeting, this is what happened. Or you can say, in yesterday's meeting, then move on to the next point. What was the behavior? So you can describe the behavior. So in yesterday's meeting, you provided a detailed analysis of the data. And then you can say, what was the impact of this? So you can say, this helped us to understand the problem more clearly. So in terms of your feedback, you are explaining the situation. So you can say, in terms of your chapter that you've sent me, you can say, there was room for improvement in terms of the level of detail that you have provided. So by doing this, it will actually help us to improve the study, and by doing so, help you to obtain your degree a bit faster. So by using SBI situation, behavior, and impact, considering these 3 points, we are actually able to foster effective communication. The next point would be technology as a bridge. So both supervisors and students can use digital tools for real-time collaboration and allowing for flexibility. So obviously this is a method for effective communication. So there's even project management tools. One that we've used is Atlassian Jira, where as a supervisor, you don't have to have daily meetings with your students. You as a supervisor can actually enroll all of your students into this group, and each of them would be able to upload their progress on specific tasks per day, per week, per month, and they can track the progress. By doing that, instead of you having to meet with 10 students on a daily basis, during your morning when you come in and you're going through your emails, you can spend a few minutes just to browse through basically the interface, and they'll say, okay, I have three. So Lorenzo had three tasks yesterday. He completed two, one is in progress. And that just allows for better communication and streamline communication as well. In addition to this, we have tools such as Google Docs for sharing and editing, which allows, for better collaboration. And we have other tools such as Trello, which is allows us to track progress as well as our deadlines. So these are some tools that we can make use of and improves communication between the different generations. So the next one is going to be conflict resolution techniques. So it is
Sorry, Doc.
important.
Before moving to the next one, we have two questions on the chat.
Mhm.
One from Slindile. How can we balance digital and face-to-face communication to build stronger relationships?
Okay. So I feel if we look at these project management tools as an example, I feel that they are very important to provide updates on a daily basis to our supervisors. But we need to remember that these just provide basically this task was done. It highlights the main tasks. It does not provide deeper information in terms of what were the challenges, why did it take you longer, how can this be improved. So I think that if we look between the both of them, we can use this form of technology to track our progress and to keep a record of all of our activities. But the more formal method of communication would actually be important here, because that is where you have a discussion with your supervisor. So I hope that answers the question. The next question, Nkosi, please.
Yes, the next question is from Musa. How
Mhm.
can generational differences be dealt with where each generation are set in their ways?
Hmm. I think this, in my personal opinion, I think this comes down to more of the individuals in this, shall we say, in this situation. Even if you are from, let's just say, if you can be a boomer, you can be Generation X, or you can be millennial or Gen Z, whatever it may be, you may have some of these characteristics, but your willingness and openness to compromise is actually one of the major determining factors. So as much as we can provide a framework and say, oh, in order for these two generations to communicate effectively, A, B, and C needs to be done, there needs to be consensus between the two parties that we are open to actually collaborating and coming to an agreement between them. But I think personally, let's just say we work on the assumption that both parties are actually, they're quite easygoing people. Like in terms of your supervisor, they're very understanding. The student is also very understanding, but there is a generational gap and there is a difference in communication style. In that way, I think that a conversation, an open and honest, respectful conversation can be held between the two parties, where each of the parties can explain their perspective and maybe why they expect things to be done a certain way, and thereafter a consensus is reached between the two parties. There is no, there's no magic pill or a step that we can give that will be able to fix this, but it will be highly dependent on the individuals, your supervisor and the student, the type of people that they are, the type of personality that they have. And even beyond that, I think, if that style of communication does not work, then you're going to have to try something else. You may have to try a different approach. So if as a student, let's just say your supervisor does not want you to use any of these project management tools, they expect daily updates, then maybe you can come to them with not just, oh, I feel this would be better, but come to them with evidence-based or fact to show this daily meeting takes up 1 hour of your time and my time. Whereas if I use this tool, it can be done in 5 minutes. And instead of spending 5 hours a week on daily catch-ups or 2.5 hours a week on daily catch-ups, we're spending 1/5 of that, which will be half an hour or an hour. So I think the way in which you approach it will obviously have to be tailored to your specific supervisor, to that specific generation. But there are various methods that you can use to basically improve communication between generations. And generally, it relies on the premise of I need to understand your perspective and I need to find a way for you to understand my perspective. Because I believe if people are presented with the facts and there's no biases that are present, they can come to a consensus as well. So I hope that answers both of your questions. If not, please feel free to let me know and I'll try to elaborate a bit more on that as well. So we spoke about conflict resolution techniques, and we just wanted to highlight the importance of addressing conflicts early before they escalate. I gave an example, a few workshops ago of a colleague of mine who actually they were doing their PhD as well, and fantastic, brilliant student. I learned a lot from them. They were so on point with their research that it was quite incredible the amount of work that they were actually getting through. At some point throughout their studies, there was actually a disagreement that arose between the supervisor and the student. And the issue, for whatever reason, I was not part of the discussion, but the student did not feel heard in this discussion. It actually escalated to the point of the student stopping their research. They stopped their degree. They joined another university and they started their degree again. So it was like 3 years of work because they refused to work under the supervisor anymore, something which could have actually been dealt with much easier and probably was, if there was just a conversation that was had from what, my understanding of the topic is, could have been actually resolved. So this is an extreme example, but it just goes to show, we're dealing with people at the end of the day, and there's emotions attached to us as people. So it's always important to address the conflicts early before these thoughts start running in our minds and it builds up into this massive problem when actually it can be solved with a few words, such as, maybe from the student, my apologies, prof. I didn't mean to be disrespectful, or from the supervisor, my apologies, I didn't mean to not respond to your email, because life happens as well. So the way in which we communicate, it can simplify our lives in academia in many ways as well. So some of the techniques we can employ here would be, we must focus on solving issues rather than assigning blame. So it doesn't make sense to say, you know what, the machine broke because, or the cells have died because you didn't do A, B, and C. Because by you assigning blame to the person, it's not going to fix the machine or allow the cells to be reconstituted. It doesn't work that way. So rather you can focus on how you can actually resolve the issue. So again, we use I feel statements to express your emotions. Is that a question or just someone's mic was unmuted?
Sorry, Doc. I think someone's mic
Okay.
is
Okay.
unmuted, so
No.
I'm gonna mute now.
Okay. No problem.
Yes, you can continue, Doc. Sorry for that.
Good. Thank you. And the next thing we're going to talk about is in terms of conflict resolution. It is important for us to remain calm and professional during disagreements. And this obviously is to avoid making situations worse. So some good advice that we will hear very often is that if you are in a heated discussion with someone and you are burning, you're itching to actually just respond to this person, maybe think about, will I be proud of the way that I'm dealing with the situation 2 days or 3 days from now? Because more often than not, in that angry state, we do and say things that don't align with our character, and we actually end up feeling guilty about it later on. So to prevent this unnecessary emotional stress, just try and remain calm, excuse yourself in the room if needed, and always maintain a level of professionalism during our disagreements between students, as well as if you have disagreements with your supervisors as well. The next point would be, and I'm coming to the end of my presentation, I'm trying not to be too much longer, would be managing expectations with a calendar. So what exactly does this mean? So shared calendars and timelines can help both parties stay on the same page. So if you see if I send my chapter in today and it's a 30-page chapter, in my mind, like my supervisor has no one else is submitting their thesis this semester. They have nothing else to do. They can spend time on it. But in actual fact, your supervisor may be reviewing 5 other theses, or they may be, preparing for a conference, or they may have academic faculty meetings, or whatever it may be. So and obviously we don't have to go into the specifics, but maybe just block out time on your calendar so that your students can actually see, what, there is things that they're busy with. They will get to it as soon as possible. And again, based on your agreement that you said previously, feedback can be received 2, 3, 4 days after it has been sent or whatever you come up with, but there is a clear expectation for that as well. So it's important to encourage both supervisors and students to use project management software. And I think the examples here would be like Trello, Monday.com. I personally like Atlassian Jira, that worked quite nicely. And all that it does is it allows us to be aligned to one another. It allows us to collaborate more effectively and for each of us to be kept in the loop as well. So coming towards the end of our presentation, we just want to quickly speak on building a healthy supervisor-student relationship. The first point I'd like to touch on is mentorship versus supervision. So in this regard, supervisors should be aware of the difference between mentoring, which essentially means guiding for career development, and supervising, which means day-to-day oversight of a person's research. So a mentor will help the student to navigate career paths in terms of, how to expand their skill set, maybe improve presentation skills, become more familiar with writing funding applications, whatever else it may be. In terms of publications and networking, where a supervisor, our role as a supervisor will primarily be the progress of the research. So in my personal opinion, I feel that when we enter into these relationships with our students, it's not either or, it's actually both. So we are mentors and supervisors in that we do want to facilitate their growth and overall academic development, but we also have a responsibility for them to complete their degree. So once again, it's not black and white. It is basically we will pick the best from each of these options and incorporate it into our own style as well. In order to build a healthy supervisor-student relationship, we also need to think about career development. We build this relationship with our students, and at the end of the day, we do want to see them succeed because a lot of hard work has gone into molding them and equipping them, either it be financially through sending them to conferences or maybe late hours that's spent going through their thesis or their chapters. So in this case, in terms of career development, as supervisors, we should actively look to involve our students in discussions about career development, get our students thinking about what are the next steps. Do I want to remain in academia? Do I want to, get my master's and then move into industry? And, include opportunities for networking, because I look at my previous supervisor and her network that she had, if there was an issue, if there was a technique that we needed information on, a machine that we needed to use, it was always like, give me a few minutes or give me a day and I will sort it out, because she had that network. Now, it takes years for someone to obviously put that together, but as supervisors, we would be, and especially as emerging supervisors and academics, we will be best placed to actually, also include our students into, if you have problems with FTIR or XRD. I'm just using some techniques that we've done, from my study. This is who you reach out to. If you're doing funding applications, these are some useful websites in which can guide you. These are some useful resources, or that kind of things as well. In terms of supporting career development, students also need to take initiative by seeking advice. Because as a supervisor, you don't want to feel like you are talking all the time. And sometimes we get the impression that, the students are actually tired of us because they don't want to hear what we have to say. So there's no clear communication there. It is the onus on the student to also come to you to be like, Dr. So-and-so, Prof. So-and-so, I'm actually thinking about this. What is your advice? So I think it's also important in fostering open dialogue for us to let the students know they can come to us to seek advice, in terms of they want to seek professional development sessions and basically encourage them to stay proactive in their career goals. And the last point here would be setting boundaries. I think we've touched on this. Briefly, I'll say it is important for us in this collaboration, in this relationship, to set clear boundaries between our supervisors and our students. The relationship that exists is one that is professional, and it should be clearly defined in any agreement that we have going on there. Obviously, I don't expect to necessarily bother or trouble my student on the weekend, every single weekend between 9 and 5, because that is time that they may be using for their family. And at the same time, the same is true for me. If I'm spending time with my family during the weekend, yes, on the odd occasion, we will all go over and above, but it should not become the norm. For example, a student calling you at 2 in the morning, or, even having your personal cell phone number. These are boundaries that need to be set and clearly defined within that relationship early on, shall we say, and we need to be transparent about our availability as well as our preferences for working hours, making sure these align with each other's expectations. So there are 3 case studies I quickly want to go through. I'm just going to read them out. And if anyone wants to contribute, please feel free, unmute your mic. I'm not going to be much longer. Yeah, and if no one wants to speak, feel free to type in the chat box. I will just go through some of the scenarios and maybe some possible solutions that we have actually come up with as well. So the first case study, or the first example, will be that of the silent researcher. Now, many of us may have encountered or even been silent researchers, during our journey. And basically, this should be the challenge is, how should the supervisor address a situation where the postdoc/student is not providing regular updates and progress is unclear? So is there any takes from based on what we've learned, are there any takes from the group? While we wait for that, I will just come up with a solution that, or rather a possible way to address this. So in this case, the perspective of the supervisor will be, this student is not working, because I'm not sure what's happening. Maybe the student prefers working late at night, and the supervisor never sees them in the lab or never sees them in the research group. So obviously, clear, effective communication is key here. So a possible way to remedy this will be to schedule a meeting to check in and set clear expectations for communication in terms of updates. So once again, we are making our expectations known. And if they have been made known before in a document previously, it'll be good for us to pull up this document and be like, we both agreed to this. Can we please stick to this as much as possible? Because it allows me to track your progress and also allows you to get regular feedback and monitoring to see that your project is moving in the right direction. So it is important for us to encourage postdocs as well as students to ask for guidance, especially when it is needed. The next type would be that of overbearing supervision. So we look at it now from the position of a student. So how should a student or a postdoc approach a supervisor who is overly involved in every aspect of their research? And this is preventing them from developing a level of independence, because we do realize that we learn a lot more from our failures in the lab, shall we say, or even, in any form of research you're doing. When something doesn't work out, we actually learn a lot more from that than we do from what has actually worked if it just works straight the first time. So from a student perspective, how should they approach a supervisor who is overly involved in every aspect of their research? Again, please feel free to type in the chat box if you have any contributions. And a solution that we have actually come up with would be, to just basically have a conversation about the expectations in terms of the level of independence and what type of feedback you expect as a student. Now, remember, any communication you have with your supervisor or any communication you have with any individual in the university should always be respectful. So approach the topic in a respectful term, and obviously you guys can come up with a solution to that. So it's important for us to agree on specific tasks that can be handled independently while still receiving mentorship. So it's still, a compromise between the two. And the last example or case study would be that of misunderstood feedback. And this is something which arises very often. The moment that a student receives feedback, they feel as if they are being, in some cases attacked, or, my integrity is being questioned, or my ability is being questioned, and it becomes a personal issue. So how can a student address the feedback that feels overly critical or discouraging? So maybe it's just best, once again, for you to have an open discussion. You encourage a feedback discussion. You ask for clarification on specific points and ask for suggestions or improvements to avoid misinterpretation. So something that, for me personally has worked is when I'm sending feedback to a student, I will go through the document, I will make track changes, but I will set up a meeting with them first. And this is just a personal approach. It's we will have to adapt it to our own style. But before I send them the document, I provide them the context of what I've said there. So it only has to be a 5 or 10 minute conversation. You can say, you know what, thank you for joining this meeting. I did like A, B, and C parts of your chapter. I feel that C, D, and E are areas that we can work on. Now, when you go into the document, you'll see a lot of track changes. And what that does is it provides context for when they're reading your comments, they will associate it with the conversation and the tone that you've had previously. Because often if we see a comment just plain on a screen, there is no context that has been placed to that, and therefore we understand that it can lead to certain emotions as well. So if I can take 30 seconds to quickly recap some of the main points, we know that effective communication requires understanding, flexibility, as well as open dialogue between the parties in that relationship, between a supervisor and a student. The techniques we covered is the 5W1H framework, as well as SBI model, which can foster clearer communication. And the last point would be building a relationship between the supervisor and student requires mutual respect, clear expectations, as well as ongoing professional developments. So I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you for the questions and the contributions. I'll hand over back to Mr. Nkosi now. If there are any further questions or contributions, please feel free to share them with us. We would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lorenzo David, for such a wonderful presentation. I see we do have some couple of questions. I've noted Dr. Sanele. He has raised a hand up. But firstly, I would like to go through some chats. Dr. Musa asked, is there a standard operating procedure for supervisors at UJ, perhaps a document outlining their role and responsibilities, which holds supervisors accountable for their role in the student's journey? Well, I think two colleagues, they can correct me with this one. There is a document, a supervisor and student agreement, whereby they sign an agreement at an early stage when the student has registered and allocated a supervisor. And that agreement outlines all the supervisor's responsibilities as well as the student responsibilities. So a supervisor sign and the student sign and a co-supervisor also sign. But I'm not sure if it differs by department or faculty, because I'm from engineering faculty and I know of that document. So colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong with this one, just to answer to Dr. Musa's question. Uh, well, I see Dr. Gani as well. We have a UJ supervisor student agreement with the roles on it, and both parties sign it at the beginning. Also, Dr. Agani is agreeing to what I was just saying now. Thank you for that contribution. Now we can move to Dr. Kamede. Dr. Kamede, you can go ahead and ask a question. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Mine is not a question per se. It was just that a contribution, if I may call it, towards what Dr. David mentioned towards the end in terms of dealing with feedback and all of that. It made me remember my message that I sent on to the student on WhatsApp, because the communication with some of us is as flexible as going to WhatsApp. I think I don't have a problem. I think supervisors will find it more effective as well. So I gave the student feedback, and sorry about that disconnection. I was saying I gave the student feedback, and then I said I sent it on via email, but on a sense of humor kind of note. I sent a message on WhatsApp to say, hey, make sure that you eat before you open my email. And the student laughed and said, did you are the comments going to make me lose my appetite and all of that? But it's just a way of saying to the student, take your time. Those comments are not meant to sort of like make you feel like you are stupid and all of that. So I think it helps to explain, like Dr. David said, on the body of the email as well. Highlight some of the few things that you have found on the chapter that you were reviewing, or on the proposal that you were reviewing, so that the student can see the key points before they open your red, if I may put it in that way, document that you have sent. But at least they've already kind of they've seen the email, and you go through with them the comments. I just did with a long one with one of my students in Cape Town, where we spent some good 2 hours going through the chapter, letting him ask some of the questions, and letting him as well, ask wherever he is not understanding, so that I can clarify, and I'm asking questions. So I really think it works to continue treating them as human, and understanding that they are sometimes volatile, they are different. So thank you so much, Doc, for the presentation. I think from me, that's what I wanted to just share.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Dr. Gumede. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of that, and it's good to see that, another example of how this has actually worked positively. So thank you very much. Josie, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Lorenzo, and to colleagues for your contribution. If anyone, colleagues, do have a question, please ask now before we close the session. We only have 3 minutes to go. Well, if there are no any other questions, but colleagues, if you still have a question, just unmute your mic or just type in the chat. I'll just go through the key takeaways from our discussions for today. Thank you, Dr. Lorenzo, again for sharing this kind of presentation with other colleagues as well. Thank you so much for your contribution. What I've taken from this workshop of today is understanding generational differences, overcoming communication barriers, and leveraging technology for better enhancement and providing constructive feedback. And also, I've learned that bridging generational communication gaps in academia requires empathy, adaptability, and continuous learning from both students and supervisors. So as Dr. Lorenzo was sharing today, and also to create an environment where collaboration and mentorship and academic success thrive. Thank you so much for that. A big thank you to our facilitator, Dr. Lorenzo David, for sharing valuable insights and guiding today's discussion. Thank you to each and every one of you colleagues for your active participation throughout the whole session and your contributions and engaging in this today's session. Before we officially close the session, we kindly ask you colleagues to complete the feedback evaluation form. The link has been shared in the chat. Your input help us improve our future workshops. We appreciate your time and commitment to enhancing communication in academic supervision, and look forward to seeing you in at our future workshops. We do have workshops that is starting now at 12. The workshop Turn It In Made Simple, a guide to managing plagiarism and maintaining academic integrity. So our colleague from CAT, Mr. Melvin Damons, will be facilitating that workshop to guide supervisors as well as academic staff on how to navigate around Turn It In. So we're looking forward to that workshop, colleagues, and please do join. We will also be sending shortly a link or a meeting code for that workshop to those that haven't registered for that. And also we have a panel discussion which is happening tomorrow at 10. So we do have our professors, experienced professors from different expertise. The panel discussion is about mentoring the next generation, insights from senior and emeritus professors on research and academia. So please do look out for that. It started 10 tomorrow morning. The flyer is sent out throughout all our model communities. So if you are unable to get a flyer or to register for that panel discussion for tomorrow, we kindly request you to send us an email on supervision calls or RCD inquiries. So we will then help you get registration for that workshop. Without any further waste of time, colleagues, thank you so much for your attendance. We look forward to meeting you in the next workshop, which starts in about 30 minutes time. Thank you so much, everyone. You can have a great day further. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.